when it was in the English court, the judges in those cases thought that it was not a subject for judicial review. They were, unsurprisingly, I think, a bit conservative, and hinted, and didn't want to get too involved politically in a matter of as big as this. Whereas in Scotland's highest court, they did wish to intervene. I think that they were right. In short, you have on the one side the government claiming that prime ministers do this all the time, though for a few days, to separate different sessions of parliament. Whereas on the other side, the argument is that the prime minister is suspending parliament for the purposes of changing the law of the land in a way that parliament has voted expressly against. And whether or not that's constitutional, I think that the Supreme Court will find that it was unlawful and side with the Scottish court.
If it did make that ruling, what are the consequences?
Well, the consequences are huge. When the Scottish High Court ruled, finding that the request to Her Majesty the Queen was unlawful, that the proroguing was thereby ended, that there was no suspension was unlawful and should have stopped. Of course, the government has been saying that everyone should wait until the Supreme Court decided the case. If the government loses this case, then it does mean that Parliament should be meeting as soon as possible, hopefully the next day, to reconvene its business and to consider whether or not no deal should remain on the cards or not.
Boris Johnson seems characteristically quite confident that things will go his way, whether or not you believe him. But they've increased the number of judges in the Supreme Court from 9 to 11 people to sit and hear this. It's also the first time ever they've been summoned for an emergency hearing. Does that give an indication of the significance that they believe this ruling will be?
I think it does show the significance of this case, but think back to we'll call it the original Miller case, where the previous Prime Minister, Theresa May, was trying to trigger Article 50 without involving Parliament. Now, I didn't know a lawyer, I didn't know a legal academic that thought that the government would win. Everyone I spoke to thought Miller was going to win big, and she did. We have the same type of bluster from the Prime Minister. Oh, there's this reassurance that everything will be fine. But I think that there's really nothing behind the smile. I think that there really is a pretty weak case that they've got forward. There's no real reason for 5 weeks. It's never happened in modern British history to set a new Queen's speech agenda, so on and so forth. It's clearly for the purposes of stymieing, as the Scottish courts called it, Parliament. And indeed, when the barristers, the winning side against the government, when they subpoenaed the notes from the Prime Minister looking at their meetings, those notes did say they were looking for ways of effectively frustrating Parliament, and that was the inference that the court made. So I think that the Boris Johnson might be very, try to put a brave face on what progress he thinks he's making in Europe to a British audience, and how far he thinks he might get in the Supreme Court. But he's got a very bad record of winning anything in the courts as to success earlier Conservative governments on Brexit. And I think he's going to lose this one too.